Okay, we're going to take a look at designing a image slider slideshow using JavaScript. You can do this with pure CSS, but obviously for our website we want to use JavaScript, and indeed JavaScript's rather more powerful in how it can do it than CSS is, but we're going to look at quite a simple implementation. So you can see I've got this little slideshow here that's just flicking through 3 images, and I'm going to show you how to set that up. So we take a look at the code and we'll start with the HTML. I've got a separate script file which is slideshow.js, because I can do that on my computer and it doesn't break, which is nice. We've then got 2 other tags that we need. One is body onload slider. That's going to call my function after the body loads, or when the body loads. So it's then going to run that function, which is specified in my JavaScript over here. It's then also got an image, just your standard image source tag, and that's loading in image1.jpg, so the first image in the slideshow. An ID of slide so that our script can find it. You'll see it references it here, and just a width and height. Obviously when you do this in your page, the specification I've given you, the requirements I've given you, are that you use CSS for positioning and styling. So take this out and stick it in your styling under an image or under that ID. Right, so we've got our script tag there to associate it with our script, our onload event to actually run the function once the page loads, and an image to give us a space to display these images in. Let's have a look at the actual JavaScript. So there's a few bits to this, and we're going to start off up here, which is declaring some global variables. So anything outside of a function as a variable in JavaScript is going to be global. So although it doesn't matter too much with this, it means you can load it you can call those variables from whatever functions you've got down here, no matter how many functions you have, and they will be stored globally. So if you change it with one function, it will be stored, and then when you call it with the next function, you'll get the different value. So we're going to start off by creating an array, and I've called that slide images. And to create an array, use the variable keyword, slide images equals, and then these square brackets. You will see sometimes new array used, but you shouldn't use that. There are good reasons not to use new array, because it operates in a slightly strange way. It's kind of a legacy command, and when you put numbers in and things, it starts to get a bit complicated. So stick with just using equals and then the square brackets, which denote an array. And then we're going to define the actual items in our array, which are obviously 0 index. So we've got 0, 1 and 2 for our 3 images, and we need to do 2 things. One is to create a new image object in that array, and then we're going to set the source property of that image object to image1 in this case, or image2 or image3. So this is going to allow us to preload our images, so that when our script starts to use them and starts to put them on the page, they don't have to be loaded. They're already sitting in the page's cache, so they'll instantly appear on the screen. So the 2 steps we need are, first of all, let's take the 0 item in our array and create a new image that's sitting in that 0 index, and then set the source property for that image object to image1.jpg. So here where I'm saying slide images 0.source is the same as saying that image.source equals, and then we give it the location of the file to load. And then we're just going to do that for each one. So slide images 1, again we create a new image, we give it the source. Slide images 2, create the new image, give it the source. At that point we'll have preloaded our images, and you'll need to do this for however many images you've got. And then finally, we're going to set this little iteration variable to 0, and that's just going to help us count through and make sure we loop back correctly when we're going through our script. After that, we've got our actual function that's being called. I've just called it slider, but obviously you can name it whatever you like. There's the opening brace for the function, and then this section here is kind of an escape. So what it's saying is if, and that's a not, so an exclamation mark in JavaScript and most programming means if this is not true. Document.images basically says if it's not the case that images can be a property of document, so it can be a child of document, then exit the function return. That's for browsers that can't handle images being used by this way in JavaScript. You're probably talking Internet Explorer 5 and before, but it's worth putting in just in case, and it's also going towards what we talked about before, the idea of writing JavaScript slightly differently for different browsers. So that's one example. It's a fairly loose example because you have to have a very old browser for that to work. So ignoring that bit, let's skip on. We've then got this section, document get element by ID slide dot source equals slide images I dot source. So what's going to happen is each time you run through this function, it's going to increase I. So you can see down here I++. So the first time you run through, I will be 0. The second time I will be 1. The third time I will be 2. And it will go through, so it'll be, first of all, it will load slide images 0, which is our image 1. Second time it will load slide images 1, which is our image 2. And the third time it will load slide images 2, which is storing image3.jpg. And it's calling the source value for that, which we've set with these lines. So each time you run through, that I will increase and it will call a different image and put it into the element slide. So this get element by ID line here goes to the document and tries to find something called slide, which is our image. So it's then basically replacing the source here of that image with whichever one of these we've got to in our array. Right, we've then got an if statement, and this if is if I, which is our little variable up here that we set to 0 at the beginning, is less than slide images dot length minus 1. What that does is it finds slide images, which is our array. It counts the length of that array, which is 1, 2, 3 items, and then it subtracts 1 off it to get the last index, which is 2. If that's true, if I is less than 2, add 1 to I. Now, it doesn't matter how many images that you load in at the start. If you use this line, it will still work correctly because it will work out what the last index is for you. And provided you're not at the last index, add 1 to I. So the next time you run through, that will be increased by 1. So if we think about what's going to happen, we're going to start off with 0. We're going to go slide images 0, slide images 1 is still less than length minus 1. Slide images 2 will then break that because 2 is the that equates to 2, so I will no longer be less than 2, and it will do the else instead. And the else is simply to set I to 0, so it just starts the whole process again. So if you're not at your last image, is effectively what that's saying, add 1. If you are at your last image, set it to 0 and go back to the beginning again. And then we've got this command here, which is set timeout slider 2500. What that does is it sets a counter that counts 2500 milliseconds, which is 2.5 seconds, and then it runs this function, which is going back to this. So it will then loop and run the thing again with I being 1 higher. So every time it runs through, it will load the next image in the list. Okay, hopefully that's explained everything on there. And yeah, the final version looks something like this, with probably less kittens in your case and more images. So just to recap, make sure you've got an onload event to call your function in the HTML, you've got an image set up, and you've got the actual JavaScript set up as well. The main things you'll have to do are more of these array items, otherwise it should run fairly simply just copying this code. Final thing to look at is just the structure in the folder, which is I've got my JavaScript and my HTML here, and then image 1, image 2, image 3, etc. When you edit those, hopefully yours is going to be a bit bigger than my current 100 pixel square here, and you may find they distort if you don't edit them down to about the same size. Okay, that should be everything. Good luck with that, and hopefully this video makes sense.